I'm going to give you like 4 stages towards building a relationship that lasts. So that's the idea, build a relationship that lasts. 4 stages. I'm going to pull all 4 words from Proverbs 24, 3-4. So if you have a Bible or you have an app with you, Proverbs 24, 3-4. This is what it says. By wisdom, a house is built, and by understanding, it is established. By knowledge, the rooms are filled with all precious and pleasant riches. So the image is pretty simple, right? You build something, and for that thing to be good and sturdy and beautiful, you have to do 4 things. You need to actually identify what the house is, you need to actually build it, you need to establish it, and then you ultimately need to fill it. Oh, also, the Slido thing behind me, I apologize, got a little ahead of myself. As I am teaching, if you have any questions, I assume you will have some questions, you can text them in through the Slido app. Just point your camera out there, use the QR code. So any questions during, there'll be a little panel at the end where we'll interact with those questions and a few that I just didn't have enough time to answer in what I'm teaching. So, returning to what I was saying, this proverb teaches us 4 words. So, before we get too much further, I'm going to show you something that I draw for the pre-marriage class. So this is part of the content of how I describe what a marriage should be. So I tell people that when someone gets married, what they are trying to do is they're trying to build a house, metaphorically speaking. And Proverbs 24 is part of where I get that idea from. And when you build a house, the most important thing is you have to have a good foundation, but then eventually you actually have to build something on that foundation. So here are the things that I think are essential, necessary, that when you look through God's word, this is the bare minimum. These would be the 4 sides for a foundation, and then there's going to be ingredients that actually build up the house. So the first thing, most important thing, is when you look through the scriptures, faith is considered the most important thing. When Proverbs 1:7 says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. So part of building a relationship is you actually have to see the world the same way, and that begins fundamentally with believing in the same God. So you have to believe in the same God, and then there's going to be like a baseline level of treatment of each other. So there's no person in the world that goes into a relationship and says, I hope I get cheated on in the next month, right? Or I mean, hopefully that's not. Maybe there's some of you out here, but that'd be weird, right? No one goes into a relationship and thinks, I hope that they disrespect me. I hope they belittle me in front of all my friends. I hope they always put themselves first and totally take advantage of me, right? So there's a baseline level of respect where we expect that they would be loyal to us, that they would treat us well, not abuse us, right? So faith in God, in the same God, baseline level of respect. And then according to God's design, God designed marriage to be a hetero monogamy. So God's design is that one man would marry one woman, and together they would build a life. If this is the foundation, this is the beginning, what actually builds up the home, as I teach in the class, is what's called companionship. You actually have to be friends. Companionship. You actually have to be friends with the person that you marry. And this is going to be part of what we talk about tonight. The big question is, if you have to be friends with the person you marry, at what point do you need to be friends with them? Like date number 1, date number 100, well into the marriage? That's a challenge. But fundamentally, what builds up a relationship is if you want the same things in life, you have to have the 4 things on the outside, or you don't even have a foundation to build on. But once you have a foundation to build on, you actually need to be friends. You need to want the same things in life. You need to have activities and values that are shared. And then married people do 2 things. They have sex, and they potentially have kids. So the capacity for childbearing is part of what marriage is designed to be. So if this is what marriage is, like this is what builds up the house. So my picture is 2-dimensional. So imagine that it's 3-dimensional, and the companionship is what actually built up the house. What I'm going to give you is the 4 stages that actually make what a marriage ought to be. And dating, I believe, is supposed to lead to marriage. Like that's what we're looking for. You start dating someone because you are looking for a spouse for life. So I chose Proverbs because Proverbs as a genre works really well. It teaches you how to view the world, and then from that, you can learn things about life. So we're going to take 4 words. I'll flip this. That core strength. I actually just tweaked my back, Ryan. So I was going to gas myself up, and then I know I'm lying. Okay. So the very first word that I want to work with is identified, which if you look at the passage, it's not actually there. But the first word that we see is by wisdom. So there's a kind of life you have to have. A house. So there is something that you're actually trying to build. There is something that you have identified that you think is good. So I'll just use the word identified. So that's stage one. Stage one is that you walk into a relationship and there is something, or you are looking for a particular kind of thing. In house building, the very first thing you have to find is a piece of dirt. Right? You can't build anything unless you have a place where you could actually build the project. So I call this stage just intentional friendship. So every one of you, at the very least, is in phase one of a building project. Every single person here, because all of you have friends. And there is a way that we ought to pursue friendship that builds towards the next thing, not necessarily going towards the next thing with every person, but building towards the next thing. So intentional friendship means that we pursue meaningful relationships with the opposite sex. Like, I wanted to include this because I have found this to be like the most challenging thing in my own life. Like, I'm 32, I'm about to be 33 actually, so I'm old. But until I met my wife, I mostly had guy friends, and then I would have one or two like girls that I was friends with, but it was because I was romantically interested in them. Like, I really struggled to be friends with guys and girls. I mostly wanted to spend time with the boys so we could hoop or play Halo. So, which I'm not saying that obviously I've grown up a little bit, but I think one of the biggest challenges in kind of the young adult era is that we have like a very niche group of friends, and we're like, these are my people, that's all I'm gonna spend time with. They tend to be the same sex, right? So part of this intentional friendship era of life, phase one, what I'm calling, is that you want to be around people that value the same things in life. Like just Christian people. This is where I think church or young adults is like such a wonderful place to be, because you want to be around people that want the same things in life. That doesn't mean you're interested in every person. It doesn't mean you're trying to date every person. It just means that what you are trying to build right now is friendship, because what friendship does is it gives you an opportunity to practice all the life skills that you will need if you make it to marriage. Like in friendship is where you learn to balance your time. In friendship is where you learn to spend time with people. This is just that first phase of every person's relationship. So while you're in there, in phase one, intentional friendships, just spending time with people, I've spoken on this before. I think every single person needs to identify what they would be looking for in a potential spouse. So I've used the language of non-negotiables before. I preached, I think, in January about this, where I think every single person should have 3 to 5 things that are not non-negotiable, hence the phrase. Where when you look at friends that you have, when you look at people you know from church, when you look at people you work with, you're looking at everyone and you're saying, no one is even an option unless they check these 3, these 4, these 5 boxes. And even if they check the boxes, that doesn't mean they're an option. I want to be friends. I want to spend time with people that value the same things in life. And if someone is friendly, if someone checks all these boxes, then I'm open to a relationship. So for me, I've shared this before. The 3 most important ones to me, faith defined as intentional service. Like I work in a church, so when I was looking for a wife, when I met Rebecca, part of what attracted me to her was she volunteered, like she'd worked at summer camps all summer, and then we met on a mission trip. And then when we came back from the mission trip, she was working like as a morning volunteer with like kids ministry. And I was like, oh man, like this is someone who wants to serve in the church, like in the non-glamorous stuff, like getting cried on by babies and vomited on. And I was like, that's someone who they just value service. That's really important to me. Rebecca came from she's one of 6 kids, and she talked about wanting to have a large family herself. So I was like, okay, Christian girl, serves in the church, wants a family, and the last one is work ethic. Like I'm an immigrant kid, my mom and dad are Mexican, so all they do is work. And I'm like, I just don't vibe with like sleeping in or just chilling. Like that's not who I am. And I met a girl who wasn't that either. So I was like, okay, she checks like 3-4 boxes. She's an option. I didn't mean I started dating her right away, but this is the kind of person I wanted to be around. In phase 1 of your building project, you're just trying to make friends with like-minded people, people that you think have a same faith, people that you think value similar things, and then you need to know what it is that you're looking for. You're looking for the right piece of dirt, to continue the illustration, right? Which, don't call someone a piece of dirt. That's terrible. That's Ohio Riz, as they say, Julie. So what you are looking for is someone who meets your criteria in the form of 3 to 5 non-negotiables, right? And as you make friendships with people, you might find someone. Okay, that's phase 1 is identifying the house. Phase 2 is building the house. So building the house is actually getting into a dating relationship. So, no lie, this is the not a B. This is the hardest one. Most people get stuck in phase 1, because if I talk to young adults all the time, and they're like, well, no one really, I'm not really interested in anyone. And I'm like, really? There's not a single person on the planet that you think is like Christian and likes 2 or 3 of the same things? Like, well, I mean, there's a few people, but I don't see them that way, right? They have friends, but there may be someone they're crushing on. There may be someone that they're trying not to crush on. There may be someone that they're like, I mean, it could work, but I don't want to make things weird. And people kind of get stuck in phase 1, right? Moving into phase 2 is the hardest step because it's the most intentional. You actually have to take a step towards one specific person, and you go from lots of friends and lots of options to one person. One person that you've identified as someone that I want to pursue, or someone that I hope pursues me. And this is where things get really delicate, because you don't want to overcommit, you don't want to move too fast, you don't want to be uninterested, but you don't want to be too interested. And this is where a lot of the anxiety in dating relationships comes in, right? Where you're like, what are we? Or are we anything? No, we're just friends. Okay, I'm having a hard time reading. And the game seems to change every year as to what's considered appropriate or not appropriate. Or you ask one friend, they give you certain advice, and then another friend gives you the exact opposite advice. So you've identified someone that you think is a potential fit, but now you're struggling in that next phase of, I don't even know how to get into this relationship. So I'm going to break down for you what I think guys should do and what girls should do. And I'm very open to pushback in the panel. Julie has all the answers to every question you might have. And Josh maybe as well. All right, so if you are a girl, so for the girls in the room, I think the way that you should operate in phase 2, in the building phase, is that you need to communicate availability. So I think that's what girls ought to do. They ought to communicate availability. So by this I mean that your words and your actions should say that you are open to a relationship. That doesn't mean you walk up to a guy and you're like, date me right now. I guess you could do that, but that doesn't communicate open to a relationship. That is a demand for a relationship, right? There is a balance. I think it's little phrases. So this might seem super silly, but I was trying to think of what are little phrases that are not super out there, but are direct enough that they're hard to misread. Because as a guy, I can say this, guys are just dumb. I was married for 3 years before I was convinced my wife liked me. I was I'm not sure she's in yet. And she's we live together, we've celebrated 3 years of marriage. I'm not going anywhere. And I was I don't know. I feel like you have other options. And she's what? Why would you say that? So I think girls ought to communicate availability, and that happens through simply talking, right? And saying things explicitly that would invite further conversation. So I enjoy talking to you. I know, sounds kind of weird to say, right? But it's, as an example, I'm not saying you have to say that exact phrase. I see some of you laughing, Liz, doggone it. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to communicate to that guy, you don't have to leave. The guy's role in this is way harder, and guys get scared super fast because they walk up to a girl, or they want to walk up to a girl, but she's around 6 of her closest friends. And you know that if you fumble the bag in this one exchange, there will be 7 people who will look down upon you. And so you're why would I do it? Why would I do it? So for the girl, as hard as it is, what you want to do is with your words and body language, you want to communicate, you can keep talking to me. You don't have to leave. I'm not trying to get rid of you. You're not stupid, right? Like, maybe you don't have to say you're not stupid, but you probably shouldn't say you're not stupid, but it might not hurt. I don't know. I've never complained when someone tells me I'm not stupid, right? What we're trying to do is communicate that I'm actually open to a relationship. There's a lot of things that we do that do not communicate that. Like I already kind of shared, right? Like if, hypothetically speaking, you're a young adult who pulls up to NYA and you're like, man, I sure hope I can meet someone. And you see someone, a guy or a girl that you're kind of interested in or that you think might be interested in, and you kind of like try to sit at the same table, but there's actually no seats at that table because they're there with 10 of their closest friends, right? Is that person available? No, that person's not available. So, okay, you're like, okay, I don't want to be weird. Okay, I'm just going to go over here and talk to this person that I know. And then later, like after, so then you go to the live night, and then you come out here and you see them and they're only with one friend. And you're like, this is my chance. And you're about to go over there, and then you can tell that they're in like a deep conversation. And you're like, dang it, okay, I don't want to be that guy that interrupted, or I don't want to be that girl that interrupted, so then you don't say anything. And then you're like, well, I hope I see them next time. And they don't come for 6 months. That's just the way it goes, right? Like, there is an availability that we can have simply in the way that we stand. If you're talking to people, rather than having 5 of you in a tight circle, you can actually be a half circle that's open to someone actually walking up. That is just simple body language. In a conversation, right, rather than one-word answers, you can ask someone else a question, right? The guy walks up and the girl can say, tell me about yourself. Like what you're trying to do, it seems so basic, but what you're trying to do is say, I'm open to talking to you. I'm actually available. So, as hard as that may be, the guys, your job is way harder. For the dudes, so if the girls have to communicate availability, right, they are open to more. The guy has to communicate intentionality. Intentionality is way harder. So, in any relationship, if you have 2 people, someone has to take the first step. I think God's design is that dudes would take the first step. I think that's part of what masculinity is, that you actually have to be assertive. You actually have to, in some way, show leadership. You have to provide. And as I've shared about before, so part of God's design for dudes is that your words and your actions should say that you actually want a relationship. So this happens this is where a lot of guys go wrong, because they might talk to a girl and the girl's like, okay, they're definitely interested, and the guy just stops talking to them for like a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Or they're talking to a guy and then they find out that that guy's also talking to another girl, and they're like, wait, what were we? Right? This happens all the time. And what the guy has done is he has failed to communicate intentionality. If you're treating multiple girls the same way, that's not intentionality at all. That is you having as many options as you can, which is technically phase 1. Phase 1 is like, there are lots of options. But if you are pursuing someone, you can only pursue one girl, or you should only pursue one girl. I mean, there is a kind of vibe where guys try to talk to multiple girls, but if we're building a house, you can only build one house, right? If dating is meant to lead to marriage, then the intentionality that starts in this second phase means that you actually pick one girl, that you're like, this girl I think is the right kind of girl for me, and I'm gonna try to talk to her. That means I'm not gonna talk to these ones. I'm only gonna talk to this one. And as I talk to this one, I actually have to show her through my words and my actions that I am interested in her, which means that I ask her questions about her. I try to show her through my words and my body language that there's something about her that in terms of my time or my words that is not true for all other people. And ultimately, this will culminate in a dude asking a girl to go out, or it should. And again, if the role of guys is to communicate intentionality, this is where so often, like, guys just don't land the plane, right? They're like, no, like, we're talking and we're interested, and I think they're interested, and what ends up happening is the guy's talking to his friends, the girl's talking to her friends, but they're not actually talking to each other. And it just goes into a situationship and then fizzles out, right? Relationships really struggle to move out of this phase so often. And then what ends up happening is you go back to phase 1. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like, I'm not advocating for you to find one person, first person that you see, if you're a guy, first girl that you see, you're like, this is the one I'm gonna marry. You could be like my dad, and you're like, second time you've ever talked to her, I'm ready to get married, right? Like, I'm not saying that's the way to live. What I'm trying to say is, as you're trying to move into each phase leads to the next one, there are things you actually have to do to move into that phase. And the reality is that as people are trying to build the house, not every relationship works out. Sometimes you have a terrible read on a person where you're talking and then you realize, actually, I don't think we're a good fit at all. And that's okay. It is okay to go on a date with someone and not have it work out. That doesn't mean someone's broken. It doesn't mean they're a wicked person. It doesn't mean you're a wicked person. It just means you're not a good fit. And you should be able to tell if someone's not a good fit. If everyone's a good fit, then you're actually not ready to date because you have no idea what you're looking for. So as you're working on this, as you're in phase 2, there will be bad reads. Like, there will be people that don't work out. And that's okay. What ends up happening if you are able to lock in that date and you go on a date or you go on 2 dates, people often oversell what they value, right? So if I am talking to, not me, if you're a guy and you're talking to a girl, to continue kind of that perspective that a guy should be initiating, and the guy asks for a date and the girl says yes, like, most people on date 1, like, what do you think their goal is on date number 1? Like, make a good impression, right? It's like showing up to an interview. You're like, I have to look the right way. I don't want to say anything weird. I have to make sure I'm on time. I try to stay off my phone, right? Your only concern is looking the right way, right? If your only concern is looking the right way, like, is it possible that you might embellish what you actually care about? Yes, which happens all the time. And as people go on dates, it becomes evident that, I'm like, actually, this might not be the best fit. That's okay. If you have a person you're interested in, they're a bad read, it's okay to back out. If you're interested in someone and it seems to work well, but then they are not reciprocating to the same extent, right? So you are interested, but then they all of a sudden get cold feet, or they just ghost you. Like, whether they've said it or not, you're right back to phase 1. That's okay. Everyone is just in phase 1 to start with. Everyone is just intentional friendship. And people don't always follow through. People don't always work out. I think often in phase 2, when you're trying to build something and it looks like it's promising and all of a sudden it dies, that rejection, like, really hurts, right? It does something to us where people, like, drop into the ugliest pit you can imagine because they're like, this person rejected me, therefore all people in all places have rejected me. And things get really dark really fast, right? And your friends try to tell you, no, you're great, you'll find someone. And you're like, no, I'm done. I'm never dating again, right? Our reaction to rejection is like a crushing self-doubt, and then it actually gets way worse. People move from rejection to self-doubt, and then often they'll move to compromise. So if you get stuck in phase 2 long enough, what might happen is you're like, you know what? That foundation that we talked about, like, how necessary is it? Maybe it's not that necessary at all. You know, maybe I can buy a mini house that, is on a trailer and I can take it anywhere. I don't need a foundation at all, right? And people, right, if you get tired of just going back and forth and back and forth, eventually the temptation that you face is, if I just compromise one thing, my pool gets way bigger. 2 things, whoa, even more options. Maybe someone that didn't work out the first time, if I just change my perspective, it might work out this time. The temptation for every single person when they experience rejection is they fall into self-doubt and they face the temptation to compromise on what it is that they are looking for. And I'm here to tell you, if you are confident on what you're looking for, if you know the right house that you want to build, if you have identified your non-negotiables, what makes them non-negotiables is that they are in fact non-negotiable. They shouldn't be things that you compromise. If you're interested in someone and they don't check all the boxes, you shouldn't be interested in them. Like, the heart doesn't always know what it wants. Selena Gomez was wrong. Changed my mind. I said it. The right reaction to rejection is that we experience that rejection, that what if hits, it hurts, it's supposed to hurt, But rather than self-doubt, it's self-reflection. And we ask the question, why did this relationship end? And it ended because of this non-negotiable. Is this worth it? And the right answer is yes. I think my faith is worth it. Or having someone that has this kind of personality is worth it. Or having someone that has the same passion as me is totally worth it. And then rather than compromise, you react in trust, where you say, God, I'm actually willing to wait. And I'm willing to stay in phase 1 until I identify someone in phase 1 and actually try to pursue a relationship. And then it moves to phase 3. Phase 3 is establishing. Once the dirt has been identified, you know where you want to build, you actually start the construction project in building, like you actually have pursued a dating relationship. Now you have locked in a dating relationship. If you're a guy, you have a girlfriend. If you're a girl, you have a boyfriend. And now, in that dating, the big question is, like, what do you do in a dating relationship, right? People get stuck here. The next place they get stuck is here. People get stuck at every phase. They get stuck in this cycle of dating where they're like dating like 9 years. And they're like, yeah, I'm just not sure when the right time is. And you're like, 9 years. Do you like know anything about each other? Oh, totally. We know everything about each other. I'm like, then what are you looking for? I just want to make sure that we're like a good fit, right? So what would it be that would help you know if you're a good fit? Well, probably a lot of intentional conversations. And that's what phase 3 is. You establish the house by building or troubleshooting a relationship with intentional conversation, right? What helps someone that is actually in a dating relationship move towards the last phase, phase 4, engagement, is if they think they are like compatible people, if they want the same things in life. Everyone is looking for something, and once you find that something, what you want to do in that dating relationships is confirm that they actually believe the things that they're saying, right? People's time actually tells you what they believe. Everyone says they're about that life, but then when they actually are living, that's when you know. Everyone says they're Christian, but then when they're actually, like, if you see them go to church, do you see them read the Bible? Do you see them pray? Like, someone might say, I'm like super committed to service, but they haven't volunteered in 6 years, right? Then you have to ask the question, like, how committed are you to service? Someone says, like, I really value, like, family, but they have a horrible relationship with one of their parents. Then you're like, well, when you say family, what do you mean you value family? They're like, oh, I value friendship. I'm like, well, that's not the same thing at all, right? What you're trying to do as you establish the house is you're trying to find out, like, can we merge our lives together? What you're trying to avoid getting stuck in that space between I love them, we're dating, I think they're the right person, and I don't know if we're ready yet. That's because that's where a lot of people end up getting stuck. It's hard to get into a relationship, but once you're in a relationship, people get stuck in that, like, I don't know when we'll be ready yet. We'll find out. I don't know. I guess I'll know when I get there. But they don't. It's hard to know when you get there. So I want to give you 4 intentional conversations that advance the relationship. So you should have lots of conversations. You should ask about family, about friends, about life goals, all kinds of things. But these are 4 specific conversations that will help advance a relationship and will draw out if we actually value the same things in life. The first one is faith, where we should ask things like, where are you growing and where can we grow together? So where are you growing as a person? So if a person's like, as a Christian, I'm the same as I was last year, as I was 10 years ago, then we should be asking, okay, well, where are you different today because you're a Christian? And where do you think we could grow as Christians together? Like, what kind of things can we do together? Secondly, you have to talk about careers. What will you do for work? How will work schedules overlap? It seems like a silly thing, but that is significant as you talk about merging a life together. You will have bills to pay. You will have a life together to do. And if you work split shifts but on opposite schedules, you'll never see each other, right? Like, that's a big deal, right? Then you have to ask the question, like, is this career worth it or is this person worth it, right? That's a big question to work through. That's the kind of thing that will make you decide, like, am I going to move into phase 4, like filling the home, engagement, or is actually, you know what, it's not going to work out. This career is really important to me. I feel called into this. I feel like God has gifted me for this. There isn't a right answer, but every person has to be able to answer that question for themselves. So faith, career, home. So, like, what kind of home life do you want? What are you willing to compromise elsewhere to pursue that kind of goal. So do you want kids? How many kids? What kind of education for those kids? Those are all questions that are necessary in a dating relationship that is trying to decide if it's ready to move into phase 4. Like, we should not be getting an engagement with a person that we don't know if we want to build the same kind of life together. Engagement is preparing for marriage, which is building a life together. So you actually have to want to build the same kind of life together. And lastly, geography. So faith, career, home life, geography. Like, where will you live? Like, that can come up on date 1. That might come up after 6 years of dating. But eventually you have to answer that question, because if you're going to build a house together, you actually have to put down roots somewhere. And you have to know, is this the place where I want to put down roots? Am I trying to leave the valley? Or would I rather die than leave the valley? That's a significant thing to know if you're in a dating relationship. And if you have a commitment to that, and the person that you are dating does not, right? It's going to be really challenging to build a healthy marriage if you are pulling in 2 separate directions. You cannot move into phase 4 without having intentional conversations to troubleshoot differences that may exist in your relationship. While you're doing all of that, you spend time together, you have meaningful conversation, and in all of those things, you're still trying to check, like, does this person check all the boxes? Like, my 3 to 5 non-negotiables, are they a good fit? That doesn't mean they have to be exactly the same as you. They just cannot be in contrast to you. If one of your non-negotiables is like, I love my family, I always want to be close to them, and theirs is, I want to travel abroad my entire life, that's going to be really hard to do. It's not impossible, right? But there is a challenge, right? If one of you wants to live at an international school in Bangladesh and one of you wants to live in the valley, like, those are not the same places. Like, plane tickets are expensive. You might want to visit every month, but you actually won't. You have to know what it is that you want in life. And what you are doing in phase 3, in establishing the house, is that you're figuring out, can we actually go the distance? Once you have tested that, you've tested your compatibility through all of these intentional conversations. Phase 4 is filling the house. This is the engagement. In engagement, what you are trying to do is you are planning and preparing to merge your life together. Right? Genesis 2:24 teaches us that when a man joins a woman in marriage, the two become one flesh. Like, you become one household unit. Your life is a merger. And I mean, business isn't maybe the best illustration for a relationship, but two become one. You become one group of people that have to have now shared values and shared goals and shared activities, and you build a shared life together. So the last thing that has to happen as a person moves through the 4 phases, culminating in marriage, is that you plan and prepare for the life together by seeking mentors and counsel that will help you with any final touches to the relationship. By mentors, I mean, you need to ask the question, and you need to find someone who has the permission to share insights and give advice. Like, one of the things that happens in relationships as you move closer and closer, especially as you move into phase 4, and now you're like, we're getting married, we're planning the wedding, like, people start to insulate. They start facing inward hard, and they're like, mom and dad are stupid, everyone else is stupid, I know what I want, we've decided, I have the ring, I'm moving ahead no matter what, right? And people become remarkably hard-headed and refuse advice. So before you get there, part of having this plan is that you need to have people in your life that all along the way, and especially in that last space, would be able to give you feedback and advice into, like, hey, these are the things that we see in you that will help you continue to grow. By advice, I don't mean someone who's telling you don't get married, but I mean someone who's telling you, like, hey, it seems like this is a way that you two are consistently miscommunicating. Have you ever considered going to counseling? Have you ever considered, listening more than you speak? Like, that's feedback I received, actually. And my response was, no, I've not considered that. Thank you for your time. Which is to show that all of us need mentorship. Every single person, even when you get to phase 4, still needs someone in your life that has the permission to give you advice, to give you feedback, both in encouragement and in criticism. Like, in saying, like, we're seeing this, and it's actually probably not good. Like, this is the kind of thing that will make marriage to you quite hard. Like, this is an area that you need to grow. And not just mentors in, like, a few people that can give you feedback, but you need counsel. And premarital is, like, one of the best places to receive it. We have a class here at Northview where we teach, and it goes over just the basics, but even just the basics are important for knowing like what marriage ought to be. Like that little box, I'll spend a little more time on, or John Pazook, the care pastor, he'll spend more time on it. And it's just teaching you what to expect. If you know what marriage is supposed to be, then when you actually get into marriage and it kind of goes sideways, then you know what you want to actually be pursuing. If you have no idea what a marriage is supposed to be, then you'll just be happy with whatever you have. But we don't want you to have just whatever you have. Like all of us have different experiences, different expectations. So all of us need counsel, which you can get through things like the class or through premarital counseling. So I tell every single couple, whether you're married here or abroad, like this last phase 4 needs to include premarital counseling with a pastor preferably, but if not, then a counselor is fine too. You just need someone that will hear your stories, see how you're merging your life together, and give you a little bit of feedback as to where you're really strong and where you need to grow. Everyone needs the encouragement of like, hey, you guys are compatible, you're gonna be fine. And also like, hey, I'm seeing these 2 or 3 communication things or conflict management things or family expectation things, and it's gonna be a bit of a struggle, and you just need to be prepared that you're gonna have to work together and collaborate on building a relationship together, building a life together. Planning for success means seeking wisdom from trusted sources like mentors and counselors. So, if you go through these 4 phases, I think you will build a relationship that lasts. Like these 4 steps kind of give a chronology to what moving from single to married should look like or could look like. You identify someone through a group of, like you just have friends, you have a phase or a season of intentional friendship where you're just building relationships with like-minded people. And in that season of intentional friendship, there might be a few people that check some of the boxes. You identify one that in phase 2, building, you pursue, or you communicate that you are open to being pursued. And hopefully you move into phase 3, you actually start dating. And as you date, what you're trying to do, as you establish, is you're trying to decide, are we the kind of people who can live together for 75 years? Like that's what marriage is. You're gonna come home to the same person, and you're gonna eat the same meals, and you're gonna have the same arguments with the same person for 75 years. The highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And as you look at someone, you're like, no, I think we want the same things in life. I think we're gonna have a good life together. And then ultimately, as you move from phase 1 to phase 2, phase 3, you move into phase 4, the filling, where as you prepare to merge the life together, you seek counsel, you lock in at least one mentor, someone that has the right to give feedback and encouragement. And then phase 5, unofficially, it doesn't fit in Proverbs 24, 3-4, but phase 5 ultimately then is marriage. The goal of dating is to get married. So in each phase, what you're trying to decide is this the person that I'm willing to go the distance with? Is this the person I want to build a house with? This requires wisdom, right? Like these 4 words I think are pretty simple. The concepts are pretty simple, but then you actually talk to real people and you're like, bro, how am I ever gonna know? How am I gonna, actually I've been rejected and it didn't feel very good and I'm not sure I wanna risk it again, right? How do I move forward? Proverbs 1:7, that wisdom begins with the fear of God. If you trust God, one of the manifestations of that is that you're saying, God, I know that you know better than I do. You know more than I do. Your design is better than any plan I might have. And if your design is this, God, that in phase 1, I'm just waiting, and I'm waiting for a person who would be a good fit, then God, help me wait, and God, give me wisdom to identify someone who might be a good fit. James 1:5 tells us that if we ask God for wisdom, he will in fact grant it. And dating is one of the places where you need the most wisdom. It is so hard to find objective advice that is always true. So much of the dating conversation is, this is generally true, but there are exceptions. And then young people always find the exception. And you're like, how do I move forward? It just isn't working, and I'm getting older, and I feel more frustrated. So wisdom begins with God, so that has to be first. And then as you seek God in your season, in your phase 1 of simply identifying what is it that I'm looking for, who are people that might be compatible, You just trust God and ask him to help you be patient.